Good evening and welcome to History for Your Sleep. You're safe here and you can let your mind settle for a moment. Take a slow, comfortable breath and allow the day to loosen its weight around you. If these calm journeys bring you peace, you may subscribe whenever it feels right, quietly, naturally, without any hurry at all. Now, a gentle story begins. Tonight, we step into an ancient Chinese city, a world of high stone walls, narrow streets, quiet courtyards, wooden gates, and lantern light resting on packed earth. Here, life unfolds in steady routines beneath the calm order of the city walls. Let us wander there and allow this ancient city to rise around us in the calm of the night. The calm of the night has not fully lifted yet, and the city is still wrapped in that brief moment between darkness and movement. Shapes exist more clearly than sounds. The air feels held rather than stirred. At the gates, stone meets sky in a straight, patient line. The wooden doors rise tall, scarred by years of use. They stand ready to open, not because the day demands it, but because routine insists. Guards are already in place. They stand where they stood yesterday, and where they will stand again tomorrow. Their posture is relaxed, but exact. Their attention is not on the horizon, it is focused on the narrow space ahead, the single passage through which all movement must pass. When the gates begin to open, it happens slowly. There is no announcement. The city does not draw attention to the moment when outside becomes inside. Countryside gives way to walls, to rules, to shared rhythm. The first people step forward with familiarity rather than excitement. For most, this crossing is not symbolic, it is habitual. A motion repeated so often that it loses drama. Yet it quietly shapes the structure of life itself. Outside the walls, time stretches outward, with fields and distance. Inside, time tightens. It becomes measured by sound, by proximity, by expectation. The change is felt immediately, even if it is rarely named. The gates do more than allow entry. They define belonging. They sort bodies into those who move inward and those who remain beyond. The walls promise safety from sudden violence or chaos, but they also make every movement legible. Here, presence is noticed. Patterns are remembered. Hesitation stands out more sharply than confidence. Not because the guards are cruel, but because the city functions best when behavior remains predictable. Permits are checked, loads are weighed with practiced glances, faces are scanned not for identity, but for deviation. Deviation, more than crime, unsettles order. Once inside, the city closes around you, gently but firmly. Streets narrow. Sounds begin to gather. They echo upward between walls that lean inward. The noise is held, not released. These streets were not built for comfort, nor for wandering. They were built for flow. Carts, feet, and animals follow paths shaped by repetition. Even at this early hour, movement follows invisible lines, learned through habit, not instruction. The walls do not speak. They do not need to. Their presence alone shapes how long one may linger. It shapes how far one may drift. There is a calm here, but it is a calm built on structure, not silence. The city offers protection. It offers reliability, but it removes the comfort of being unseen. Privacy is rare, not because lives are exposed intentionally, but because density makes concealment impractical. Over time, residents learn to live within this visibility. Posture adjusts. Tone softens. Timing becomes careful. Attention is avoided, not sought. The city does not punish difference immediately, but it notices. That awareness settles into daily life like a second skin. As the light strengthens, sound follows, first cautiously, then with growing confidence. Footsteps multiply, carts creak into motion, distant voices test the air. Even now, the city remains contained. Its rhythm is controlled by walls that allow entry, but never forget their power to close again. These walls have stood long enough to teach generations a quiet truth. Safety and restriction often arrive together. Stability is not maintained through freedom, it is maintained through repetition, through compliance. For those born inside, this arrangement feels natural, not because it is gentle, but because it is familiar. Children grow up knowing the sound of the gates opening at dawn and closing again at dusk. They learn early that time here belongs to the city before it belongs to the individual. Daily life unfolds within boundaries rarely questioned aloud. To live inside the walls is to accept shared patterns of movement, shared patterns of work, shared patterns of rest. Personal choice is limited, but uncertainty is removed. Survival feels manageable inside this predictable frame. The city does not ask to be loved, it asks to be followed. As morning advances, the gates remain open. Goods flow inward, labor follows, life continues to enter. Yet everyone understands this openness is temporary. It is a condition, not a right. When evening comes, the gates will close again. They will seal the city from the outside world. They will hold everything within, not in silence, but in continuation. Life here does not stop when daylight fades. Sound will linger between walls. Movement will shift, not disappear. The city will carry on in a quieter, more restless rhythm, preparing for the hours when sleep is light, when vigilance remains, when the walls, having guided the day, begin to shape the night as well. Even after the gates have opened and the first wave of movement has settled into the streets, the city does not experience a true beginning to its day. In many ways, it never fully rested at all. Traces of the night are carried forward into morning, like a memory that refuses to fade. Sounds linger between the walls, long after darkness lifts. Faint echoes of footsteps, distant voices, the soft shifting of animals tied too close together. The quiet labor of those who rise before dawn, not out of ambition but necessity. While the sky lightens above the rooftops, the city below continues in a rhythm already underway, one that did not stop simply because the sun disappeared hours earlier. During the night, movement never entirely ceased, even when curfews restricted passage, even when lanterns marked only narrow pools of light along the streets. Certain tasks could not wait for daylight. Certain people were never granted the luxury of full rest. Guards changed posts along the walls, night watchmen patrolled alleys where fire and theft posed constant threat. Families stirred in shallow sleep, heat passed easily through thin walls, insects moved freely through open courtyards, noise carried without resistance. Sleep here was not a deep retreat, it was a state of partial withdrawal, balanced between exhaustion and awareness, shaped by the understanding that the city, even at its quietest, remained alert. As dawn approaches, this unfinished night blends seamlessly into morning. Those already awake do not mark the transition with ceremony, they simply continue. They adjust pace, not purpose. Vendors prepare stalls before light fully reaches the street. Artisans stretch stiff hands and tired backs before returning to workbenches. Porters gather near gates and markets. They wait for loads that will soon arrive. The city's demand for motion begins early. It rarely pauses. What appears to be early rising is often simply late stopping. The line between night and day grows thin within these walls. There is comfort in this constancy, a sense that life, once set in motion, will continue without interruption. For many residents, this predictability offers reassurance. Uncertainty carries risk. The city provides rhythm. It tells people when to wake, when to work, when to withdraw, when to rest lightly. This structure limits personal freedom, but it also reduces chaos. Thousands of lives move together without constant conflict. Order here is not enforced loudly. It is maintained through habit, through repetition, through the quiet understanding that deviation draws attention. Yet this same constancy carries a quieter burden. A city that never truly sleeps also rarely grants release. Fatigue accumulates gradually, not dramatically. Bodies adapt to long hours and short rest, but wear shows over time, in slowed movements, in careful pacing, in the way people conserve energy without realizing they are doing so. Noise becomes background, hunger becomes manageable, discomfort fades into normality, not because it disappears, but because there is little alternative. As the morning deepens, sound builds steadily, layer upon layer, until the city feels full, not just of people but of motion, of voices, of animals, of carts, of tools, all competing for limited space within narrow streets designed for flow, not comfort. There is no single center to this activity. It spreads evenly, like breath through lungs, filling every available passage and courtyard. Even those who remain indoors cannot escape the presence of the city. Noise travels easily through walls and doors. It reminds everyone that life here is shared, observed, interconnected. For children growing up inside these walls, this constant movement forms the background of memory. They learn early that stillness is temporary, that belonging means participation, not withdrawal. They learn to sleep through noise, to wake quickly, to accept that rest is taken when available, not guaranteed. In doing so, they absorb the city's rhythm as natural, not imposed. Over time, the city does not feel loud, it feels alive. As the sun climbs higher, the energy that carried the city through night and early morning shifts into full daylight routine. Fatigue remains, but it is masked by necessity and habit. Work expands, markets fill, streets reach their densest state. Momentum carries forward. It never truly stopped, it only changed form. The city breathes faster now, louder, more visibly alive. Within this steady motion lies both its strength and its quiet cost. By the time midday approaches, it becomes clear the city's wakefulness is not accidental, it is structural, built into walls, into streets, into expectation. Life here continues not in bursts, but in uninterrupted flow. As this rhythm presses forward, space tightens, routine sharpens. Another reality begins to surface, one shaped not only by movement but by physical limits, by streets themselves, where comfort gives way to control, and where the city's design reveals its deeper priorities. As the city's constant motion gathers strength after dawn, and the sounds of early labor fully replace the fading traces of night, attention begins to shift, not to movement itself, but to the space that contains it. Within the walls, life does not simply happen in streets, it is shaped by them, guided along narrow paths that quietly determine how people walk, work, meet, and endure each day. These streets were not designed to welcome, nor to ease the body. They exist to manage flow, to channel activity efficiently, to keep the city functioning without collapse, even when thousands move at once through spaces that leave little room for pause. Most streets are narrow by necessity, pressed between wooden walls, brick facades, workshop fronts, They rise close enough to block much of the sun. They form corridors of shifting light and shadow. Heat lingers here. Air moves slowly. During warmer months, these confined spaces trap warmth and smell alike. Cooking rice, animals, smoke, human presence, all blend into a constant background, one that becomes impossible to separate into individual parts. For residents, this sensory density fades into familiarity. For the body, it remains a quiet strain. It shapes posture, pace, patience, without ever announcing itself. Movement through these streets is continuous, but cautious. Space must be negotiated, not assumed. Every step requires awareness. Carts, animals, vendors, other bodies moving close. There is little room for wandering, even less for stopping. Lingering disrupts flow. It draws attention. People learn to keep moving, to follow patterns, not to invent their own paths. In this way, the street becomes a silent guide, teaching efficiency through constraint, not instruction. There is comfort in this structure, especially for a city that must sustain order every day. Predictable movement reduces friction, reduces conflict. Commerce functions, labor continues, administration holds, all within limited space. Officials observe easily, guards notice change. Markets remain contained within assigned zones. Disruption stands out. Deviation is visible against repetition. The street is not just passage, it is oversight, quiet, constant. Yet efficiency carries a cost, one that accumulates slowly. Bodies adapt to narrowness, to heat, to constant proximity, often without noticing how deeply experience is shaped. Shoulders angle sideways, steps shorten, voices lower. Sound carries easily between close walls. Privacy proves temporary, fragile. Over time, these constraints are internalized. People move carefully even in open spaces. Habits learned in alleys follow them home. Dirt and refuse collect along edges. Rain cannot always reach them. Waste removal exists, but unevenly. Smells persist. Insects gather, especially in warm seasons. Animals share the streets. They blur boundaries between human and urban life. Comfort becomes secondary. Function takes priority. Cleanliness turns relative, maintained through routine, not eradication. Illness spreads quietly, encouraged by proximity, limited sanitation. Despite this, the streets foster connection. Repeated encounters create familiarity. People recognize rhythm, not names, patterns of movement, of work, of rest. Belonging is marked by presence. Vendors greet returning faces. Neighbors exchange brief words while passing. Children learn early how to move safely. Spatial awareness becomes essential, not taught, absorbed. The street educates as much as it constrains. As midday approaches, intensity peaks. Design reveals its weight. Shade competes with heat. Noise layers upon noise. Movement slows under strain. Yet the city does not pause. Stopping is rarely an option. Instead, residents adjust. They seek narrow bands of shadow. They time movements carefully. They conserve energy. Efficiency learned over years. The street demands adaptation. Endurance comes not through strength alone, but restraint. A quiet understanding emerges, shared by all who live here. Streets are not neutral. They participate. They shape behavior through form, not command. They reinforce deeper values: order, predictability, control. Comfort is secondary, sacrificed gradually. Stability is preserved. This trade is rarely spoken, yet it becomes part of the social contract, one that allows the city to endure across generations. As afternoon unfolds, residents withdraw, gradually, from streets into inner spaces, but pressure lingers, carried in the body. It shapes how people sit, breathe, rest. Behind walls and within courtyards, another side of the city appears. Family life unfolds here, away from constant motion, yet never fully free from the presence of the streets beyond. But the pressure of the streets slowly releases its grip.
and movement narrows from public flow to familiar paths, life turns inward. It passes through wooden doors and low thresholds into courtyards that form the hidden core of the city's domestic world. These enclosed spaces offer separation from the noise outside, not through silence, but through containment. Walls absorb and soften sound, allowing families to exist slightly apart from the restless corridors beyond. Here, daily life unfolds in smaller gestures, in repeated routines, in movements that rarely attract attention, yet sustain the city more reliably than ceremony or spectacle. Courtyards are designed to manage climate and community. They open upward to the sky while remaining closed on all sides. They create pockets of light and air within dense urban blocks. Sunlight enters selectively. It warms stone and packed earth floors in the morning and offers shade later in the day. This balance provides relief from the harsher conditions of the street. Within these walls, work, rest, and family life blend seamlessly. Space is limited, functions overlap, activities flow into one another without formal separation. The comfort of the courtyard lies not in luxury, but in familiarity. Repeated use shapes every surface, worn thresholds, smoothened ground where feet pass daily. Meals are prepared nearby, water is carried in and stored carefully. Tools rest against walls until needed again. Conversations move easily between tasks without formal boundaries. Children play under watchful eyes. Elders sit where light is gentle. The household breathes as a single unit, bound by proximity as much as by relationship. Yet this closeness carries weight. Privacy within these walls is minimal. The same space that shelters also confines. There is little room for solitude, little space for emotional retreat. Smoke from cooking fires lingers longer than desired. It settles into hair, into clothing, into walls. Comfort here is negotiated, not given. In warmer months, air grows heavy. Insects find easy shelter. Evenings become exercises in patience rather than rest. Shared living amplifies support and pressure. Every action becomes visible. Every gesture gains meaning within the collective gaze of family and kin. Expectations are reinforced quietly through repetition. Children learn not only through instruction, but through observation. They absorb roles by watching daily behavior mirrored around them. Mistakes, like virtues, are remembered communally. Identity is shaped through response rather than intention. Despite these constraints, the courtyard remains a place of emotional grounding. It offers stability in a world governed by hierarchy and obligation. Within its boundaries, individuals experience continuity. Routines repeat across days and generations. Past and present link through familiar gestures. Sweeping floors, preparing food, arranging sleeping mats. These actions become quiet reassurance. They remind residents that life persists through repetition, even when conditions remain difficult. Belief and ritual weave naturally into this domestic space, not as grand displays, but as small acts that anchor uncertainty. Household altars occupy corners or shelves. Incense burns briefly in morning or evening. Offerings are made, not to impress, but to maintain balance. Ritual provides order within confined lives. It offers comfort through predictability, while reinforcing the boundaries that govern behavior. The darker edge of this structure appears when pressure accumulates without release. Conflicts cannot easily escape enclosed walls. Tensions linger longer than desired. Arguments echo. Grievances remain close. Emotional restraint becomes a learned survival skill. harmony persists at the cost of personal expression. In this way, the courtyard teaches endurance. It shapes physical movement and emotional response. As daylight begins to fade and the outside city shifts toward evening routines, courtyards prepare quietly for transition. Tasks adjust, resources are gathered for night, lamps are set, food is finished, sleeping spaces are arranged efficiently. Space adapts constantly to changing needs. Though enclosed, these areas never fully separate from the city's pulse. Distant sounds filter through walls, reminding residents that the larger system remains active beyond their shelter. It is within these domestic boundaries that the city's social fabric is maintained. Households absorb the pressures of public life and convert them into manageable routines. The courtyard becomes refuge and reinforcement. It protects from chaos while embedding the discipline that sustains urban order. As families settle deeper into routine, preparing for another day shaped by obligation and repetition, attention shifts forward, toward morning tasks, toward resumed work, toward roles that reassert themselves beyond the walls.
As the quiet order of the courtyard begins to loosen its hold, and the city stirs once more beyond its walls, morning work arrives, not as a choice, but as an expectation already waiting. Familiar, unavoidable, it shapes the day before it fully begins. Long before comfort settles into the body, people rise. They are guided less by personal desire and more by the collective rhythm that governs urban life. Here, every role fits into a larger structure, one that depends on reliability rather than enthusiasm. The morning does not appear rushed, yet urgency sits beneath its calm. Shops open shutters, workshops prepare tools, streets refill slowly with movement. It feels routine and inevitable. Each person knows where they are expected to go, what task they are meant to perform, how long they are likely to remain there. Deviation invites attention, and attention rarely benefits those without status. Work begins early, not only to maximize profit, but to align with daylight, with heat, with the city's internal schedule, a schedule that values predictability above comfort. For many, labor is inherited, not chosen. It passes quietly through families, like an unspoken contract. It ensures continuity while limiting possibility. Artisans return to benches worn smooth by generations of hands. Porters shoulder loads that test endurance rather than skill. Vendors prepare goods whose margins leave little room for error. Children observe closely. They absorb not only technique, but expectation. They learn where they belong by watching where others stand each morning. There is reassurance in this clarity of role. Uncertainty is reduced when paths are known. Survival feels more secure when routine is stable. The city depends on this collective acceptance. Thousands performing assigned tasks create the illusion of smooth function, even when individual strain accumulates unnoticed. Morning work becomes a shared experience. Lives connect through synchronized effort rather than shared emotion. Yet beneath this structure lies quiet exhaustion. Bodies shaped by years of repetition respond with practiced efficiency rather than energy. Rest is functional and brief. It restores capacity, not relief. The idea of working differently remains distant, reserved for elites whose roles rely on administration rather than physical output. For most, fatigue is not failure. It is a baseline condition, something to be managed, not resolved. Social obligation extends beyond the workplace itself. Behavior is shaped through observation and expectation. Neighbors note attendance, effort, conformity. Absence is noticed quickly.
Questions follow. Participation becomes both duty and proof of belonging. The city's structure depends on visibility. Morning work places everyone where they can be seen, measured, remembered. Despite this pressure, moments of quiet pride emerge. Skill develops within constraint. Dignity is found in competence rather than freedom. A well-crafted object, an efficiently completed task, a smoothly run stall. These offer brief satisfaction. Identity is reinforced through contribution. These moments are small, but they sustain endurance by providing meaning within limitation. The darker side of obligation appears when circumstances strain the system. Illness, injury, scarcity, these threaten an individual's ability to fulfill expected roles. There are no formal safety nets. Families absorb disruption internally. Labor is redistributed. Sacrifice increases. Outward stability is preserved quietly. Failure to meet obligation carries social consequences. They extend beyond the individual. Reputation shifts. Access narrows. Within tightly knit communities, this pressure lingers. Morning work therefore functions as both foundation and filter. It supports the city and reveals its hierarchy. Those with authority observe. Those without perform. This division is normalized through repetition. It becomes invisible through familiarity, even as it shapes opportunity and outcome decisively. As the sun climbs higher, the city's energy stabilizes. Labor settles into predictable patterns. Attention begins to shift towards spaces of exchange, towards places where effort becomes sustenance, where inequality becomes visible through price, through access, through hunger. The rhythm of work leads naturally into the rhythm of trade. People move towards markets, towards the spaces where necessity and desire intersect each day. As the rhythm of morning labor settles into steady repetition and the city's many hands complete their first tasks of the day, attention drifts toward the markets. This is where effort becomes sustenance, and where the realities of daily survival reveal themselves most clearly. These spaces gather people, not for rest, but for exchange. Workers, vendors, families, all drawn into an environment shaped by necessity rather than leisure. Here, food is not an abstraction. It is not comfort. It is outcome, measured in piles, in portions, in prices, quietly defining who eats well and who does not. Markets operate as controlled zones within the city. They open at specific hours. They close before dusk. Even hunger must follow order. Vendors arrange goods carefully: grains, vegetables, prepared foods. Their availability depends on season, on harvest, on transport, factors beyond the control of most buyers. At first glance, the variety appears abundant, but beneath the surface lies a fragile balance. Surplus exists alongside scarcity. Access depends as much on status and timing as on effort. Smell dominates these spaces. Cooked rice, steamed grains, fermented sauces, animal presence, human bodies, all blending into a dense sensory field. For some, these smells promise warmth, fullness. For others, they sharpen awareness of limits. Prices shift unpredictably. The day's earnings may not stretch far enough. Bargaining becomes ritual and necessity, a learned skill that determines whether a family eats adequately or falls short. The lighter side of the market lives in its human energy. Voices rise in negotiation. Familiar faces exchange brief words. Food moves from hand to hand in patterns repeated daily. Children weave through stalls carrying containers. Elders rest near edges where shade is available. The market pulses with life. It feels communal, even as competition remains underneath. In these moments, survival feels shared. The presence of others offers reassurance. You are not alone in facing daily uncertainty. Yet hunger exists here quietly,
rarely announced. Acknowledgement carries stigma and risk. The urban poor adapt discreetly. They reduce portions. They skip meals. They choose cheaper, less nourishing options. Strategies learned early, practiced silently. Meat becomes occasional, not staple. Variety narrows under pressure. Inequality is reinforced through diet itself. Hunger here is not dramatic, it is persistent, shaping bodies slowly through absence rather than excess. Control remains visible, even in everyday transactions. Officials monitor markets. They regulate prices, collect taxes, prevent disorder. Stability is maintained, but hierarchy is reinforced. Those with authority remain insulated from scarcity. Commoners absorb its effects directly. The market reflects the city in miniature, efficiency and imbalance. Food preparation happens nearby, often over open fires. Smoke rises, heat builds, crowded spaces grow heavier. Everyone is reminded of the labor required to turn raw ingredients into sustenance. Vendors work long hours, standing, stirring, serving, repeating motions that demand endurance, not creativity. Bodies are shaped by routine as much as by necessity. Waste accumulates nearby. Removal exists, but inconsistently. Sanitation remains limited. Illness spreads more easily where people gather densely. Quietly, despite these conditions, the market remains central to urban life. It offers visibility, connection, access, however imperfect. It teaches restraint. Needs must be measured carefully. Comfort is conditional. Children learn early how far a coin stretches, how to wait patiently, how to recognize when food must be saved rather than shared. These lessons are not taught, they are observed. As afternoon approaches, the market's energy shifts. Stalls thin. Urgency gives way to preparation for evening. Those who have secured enough carry purchases home. Others adjust expectations quietly. They plan how to endure until the next opportunity. The market closes without resolution. Hunger and satisfaction carry forward together into domestic spaces. What remains is a shared understanding. Food sustains more than bodies. It sustains the city's social order, reinforcing roles through access and absence. And as people leave the market, returning to workshops, homes, and streets, the physical cost of labor becomes harder to ignore. Attention shifts naturally toward the bodies themselves, the ones that perform this work day after day, shaped by repetition, by strain, by skill, and carrying the city forward one meal at a time.
As food is carried away from the markets and the city settles into the steady middle of the day, attention turns toward the hands and bodies that keep everything moving. Behind every object, every repaired tool, every woven cloth, every carried load, there is labor that becomes invisible once it becomes reliable. Craft and work form the physical backbone of the city. They shape the economy and they shape the body itself. Years of repetition leave marks on posture, on strength, on endurance. Workspaces are small, tightly woven into the city's fabric. They sit along streets beneath living quarters. Noise, dust, and movement blend into daily life. Artisans labor in dim rooms or open-front workshops. They adjust to limited light, to narrow space. Muscle memory matters more than instruction. Skills are learned slowly, through watching, through repeating, passed from parent to child, from master to apprentice. Continuity is protected. Change is limited. Innovation carries risk in a system built on predictability. There is dignity in mastery. Those who perfect a craft earn respect within narrow bounds. Reliability becomes reputation. A skilled weaver, a metalworker, a carpenter. Trust comes from consistency, not recognition. Their work fades into background, essential, rarely acknowledged. They understand their value and its limits. Skill secures survival, not freedom.
Alongside artisans work porters and laborers. Their roles demand strength, not precision. Days are measured in loads carried, in distances crossed. Their bodies absorb the city's weight directly. Shoulders bear goods, backs bend under repetition, feet learn uneven ground. Rest exists only to restore function, not to heal. Injuries accumulate quietly, treated as inconvenience until they become disabling. The physical toll is gradual, relentless. Joints stiffen, muscles ache. Fatigue becomes constant, not a phase. Without care or compensation, workers adapt. They pace themselves, conserve energy. Discomfort becomes normal. Pain is not dramatized. Acknowledgement offers no remedy. Endurance becomes expectation, shared, unspoken. Work still offers structure. It gives identity. Occupation defines position, more clearly than personal traits. To know what someone does is to know their place, their income, their rhythm. Mobility remains limited. Roles remain clear. Stability is preserved. Possibility is restrained. The darker side appears when conditions shift. Illness, injury, market change. Balance becomes fragile. Without safety nets, loss of ability unravels livelihoods quickly. Families redistribute labor. Children work earlier. Status diminishes quietly. Skill stops protecting when the body fails. Women's labor remains essential, often hidden. Textile work, domestic craft. Long hours spinning, weaving, maintaining order. Precision is required. Endurance is constant. Recognition is rare. Authority does not follow. Their labor sustains families, silently. The city depends on it. As afternoon advances, fatigue deepens. Work continues through habit. Motivation fades. Necessity remains. Social expectation presses forward. Systems function only because individuals continue, despite strain. Labor becomes agreement, silent, accepted because alternatives are distant or dangerous. What emerges is a population trained in endurance, shaped by repetition, by restraint, capable of sustaining complexity without constant oversight. The cost is physical, quietly distributed across bodies that age faster under pressure and rarely complain. As the sun begins its descent, the city's energy shifts again. Production slows. Attention moves from work to structure, from tools to authority. Boundaries reassert themselves. Hierarchy becomes visible. Who commands, who complies, guiding behavior long after tools are set aside. As the working day winds down and tools are set aside, the structure of the city becomes more visible, because when movement slows, hierarchy speaks louder. In ancient China, social order was not an abstract idea discussed only in texts or ceremonies, but a living framework that shaped posture, speech, clothing, and expectation, guiding people through their days with quiet but constant pressure. From birth, each person occupied a defined position within this order, one that determined not only occupation and residence, but also how one was addressed, where one could walk, and how one was expected to behave in public. Status was not negotiated through talent or effort, but inherited, reinforced by family lineage and community memory, making identity something assigned rather than chosen. In this way, the city taught its residents early that belonging came with limits as well as protection. Officials occupied the visible peaks of this hierarchy, moving through the city with authority marked by clothing, posture, and entourage, their presence reinforcing order without constant enforcement. Their residences were positioned strategically,
separated from the crowded quarters of commoners, allowing distance to translate into power. For most citizens, contact with officials occurred through procedures rather than conversation, as hierarchy preferred formality over familiarity. Below them, merchants, artisans, and laborers filled the city's arteries, each group aware of its rank and expected conduct, maintaining stability through mutual recognition of boundaries. Respect flowed upward, obligation flowed downward. This balance discouraged challenge while encouraging compliance. Even small deviations, such as improper dress or speech, could invite scrutiny, reminding individuals of their place. The darker weight of this system revealed itself in its rigidity, as mobility between ranks remained rare and uncertain, regardless of ability or ambition. Talented individuals might gain limited recognition, but their social position rarely shifted significantly, reinforcing the idea that effort served survival rather than advancement. This limitation was internalized early, shaping aspirations to align with reality rather than possibility. Family played a crucial role in sustaining hierarchy, acting as both support and enforcer, as behavior reflected not only on the individual but on the lineage itself. Expectations were communicated subtly but firmly, through daily correction rather than punishment, ensuring conformity without constant conflict. Children learned quickly what was acceptable by observing reactions, absorbing hierarchy as instinct rather than instruction. For those at the lower end of the social spectrum, the system imposed heavier constraints, as legal protections varied by status, and punishment could be harsher for the same offense. Fear of authority extended beyond officials to neighbors, as collective responsibility meant one person's mistake could affect many. Silence often became a survival strategy, discouraging complaint even when injustice was visible. Hierarchy also structured space itself, as neighborhoods, streets, and even seating arrangements reflected rank, guiding movement without spoken commands. Certain areas remained inaccessible to commoners, reinforcing division physically as well as socially. This spatial ordering reduced friction by making boundaries obvious, but also ensured that separation remained normalized. Despite its restrictions, hierarchy offered predictability, allowing individuals to navigate daily life with clarity rather than uncertainty. Knowing one's role reduced conflict and provided a sense of belonging, even when choices were limited. For many, this stability outweighed the risks of challenge, making endurance preferable to disruption. The emotional cost of this system lay in restraint, as personal desires were often subordinated to duty, and self-expression remained secondary to harmony. Ambition existed, but learned to move quietly, adjusting expectations rather than confronting structure. The city rewarded those who accepted this reality with continuity, if not fulfillment. As evening approaches and the city prepares for rest, hierarchy does not dissolve, but softens, retreating into habit and memory, present even in silence. Families gather. Roles are reaffirmed through routine. Social order continues to guide behavior long after official eyes withdraw. With night nearing, the mechanisms of control shift subtly, transitioning from visible hierarchy to enforced order, as laws, curfews, and surveillance take precedence. The city tightens its grip, gently but firmly, preparing to regulate behavior once movement fades and darkness deepens. As daylight begins to fade and the city's rhythm slows, a different force becomes more noticeable, not through movement but through absence. Because in an ancient Chinese city, order did not rely on constant presence, but on the knowledge that someone was always watching, even when no one seemed to be there. Law was not experienced primarily in courtrooms or written codes for most people, but through routine boundaries that shaped daily behavior quietly and persistently, teaching residents where they could stand, when they could move, and how much attention they should draw to themselves. These rules were woven into ordinary life so deeply that obedience often felt automatic, not imposed. City guards, patrols, and local officials formed the visible layer of control, stationed at gates, intersections, and watchposts, their presence a reminder rather than a threat. Most citizens rarely interacted with them directly, yet adjusted behavior instinctively when they were near, lowering voices, quickening steps, or avoiding eye contact, aware that attention could invite questions. Beneath this visible structure existed a quieter system of surveillance rooted in community responsibility, where neighbors observed one another not out of malice, but necessity. In many periods, households were grouped into units where the actions of one person could affect all, making silence, conformity, and caution shared strategies for survival. This meant that even private choices carried public consequences. The darker side of this system lay in its efficiency, as fear rarely needed to be applied forcefully because it was already internalized. Punishment did not need to be constant to be effective. The possibility of it was enough. Stories of public penalties circulated quietly, reinforcing boundaries without requiring spectacle, embedding caution into memory. Curfews marked a critical boundary between permitted life and restricted existence, transforming the city at dusk from a space of movement into one of stillness. Gates closed, streets emptied. Those caught outside without permission faced questioning or punishment, making night a regulated condition rather than a natural transition. This control over time reinforced the city's authority over bodies. Laws extended into economic life as well, regulating markets, prices, and goods, ensuring that trade served stability rather than freedom. Merchants operated within strict frameworks, balancing opportunity with oversight, aware that profit without compliance could attract attention. For poorer citizens, these controls often meant fewer choices, as access to resources depended on adherence to rules they did not shape. Surveillance also reached into behavior and morality, as acceptable conduct was defined by custom and reinforced by law. Loud arguments, public defiance, or unusual behavior could draw scrutiny, encouraging emotional restraint and predictability. Over time, residents learned that blending into routine offered safety, while standing out invited risk. Yet this system also provided a sense of security, as order reduced chaos and protected the city from internal collapse. Theft, violence, and disorder existed, but were contained through expectation as much as enforcement. Many citizens accepted these limits as the cost of living within walls that promised protection from external threats. The psychological weight of constant observation shaped inner life subtly, as people learned to measure words and actions even when alone. This self-regulation became habitual, blurring the line between external control and internal discipline. Freedom was not openly denied, it was quietly redefined. As evening deepens, the mechanisms of law grow more visible, with patrols moving through streets and announcements signaling the end of permissible activity. Lanterns are extinguished, doors secured, voices lower. The city prepares for night under rules that do not sleep. Even rest occurs within boundaries, shaped by regulation rather than choice. This transition from day to night reveals the city's reliance on control to maintain continuity, ensuring that order persists when visibility fades. In darkness, the presence of law is felt most strongly, not through action but through silence, as movement pauses and compliance fills the space. And as the city settles into enforced stillness, another layer of life emerges behind closed doors, where family, expectation, and emotional restraint take center stage, shaping private existence just as firmly as public law shapes the streets. When the city grows quieter under curfews and patrols, life does not suddenly become freer behind closed doors, because inside an ancient Chinese city, the household was not a refuge from order, but its smallest and most persistent extension, a place where duty continued without witnesses and expectations pressed even closer. Family life was structured around hierarchy and obligation, rather than emotional expression, with each member occupying a clearly defined role that rarely changed over a lifetime. This structure offered stability and predictability, but it also demanded restraint, silence, and acceptance. Love existed, but it was rarely spoken aloud, as harmony mattered more than feeling, and obedience mattered more than desire. Marriage was not primarily a personal choice, but a social arrangement designed to preserve lineage, labor balance, and reputation, binding individuals into roles they were expected to fulfill quietly. Husbands and wives learned early that personal dissatisfaction was not a reason for disruption, because the household functioned as a unit, not as a collection of individual needs. For women, domestic life carried both authority and limitation, as they managed food, children, rituals, and household rhythm, yet remained bound by expectations of obedience and modesty. Their work was constant and often invisible, stretching from dawn to night, leaving little room for rest. While their labor sustained the household, recognition remained subtle and restrained. Children entered this system early, absorbing duty not through instruction but observation, watching elders repeat the same tasks day after day. They learned that routine was not temporary but permanent. Childhood blended quickly into responsibility, with play existing only in brief moments between work, reinforcing the idea that usefulness mattered more than innocence. The darker side of this structure lay in emotional containment, as expression of frustration, fear, or ambition was discouraged, creating an internal discipline that shaped behavior even when no one was watching. Silence became a form of safety, as unspoken thoughts carried less risk than voiced ones. Emotional restraint became a survival skill, passed quietly between generations. Respect for elders anchored family life, granting authority to age and experience, but also limiting change, as younger members learned that questioning tradition invited conflict and shame. Advice flowed downward, rarely upward, ensuring continuity while quietly suppressing innovation and personal direction. Meals offered brief moments of togetherness, eaten in order of status and age, reinforcing hierarchy even in nourishment. Shared food symbolized unity, but also reflected inequality within the household, reminding everyone of their place. Conversation remained practical and controlled, focused on tasks and obligations rather than dreams or complaints. The pressure to maintain family honor extended beyond the household, as reputation shaped social standing and access to community support. Personal behavior became a collective concern. A single mistake could reflect poorly on many, encouraging conformity and caution in every action, turning self-control into a moral duty. Yet within this discipline existed a quieter form of comfort, as predictability reduced uncertainty, and knowing one's role offered clarity in a complex world. Many accepted these limits not as oppression, but as the natural shape of life, believing stability was worth the cost of personal freedom. The city's broader order echoed within these walls, reinforcing the idea that control was necessary for survival, and that emotional restraint protected harmony. Even affection was expressed carefully, through actions rather than words, maintaining balance without disruption. As night deepens and families prepare for rest, expectations do not disappear but settle into the background, shaping sleep itself. Bodies lie close together in shared spaces, aware of each other's presence and responsibilities. Privacy remains limited. Dreams unfold under the same pressures that govern waking life. This quiet endurance, practiced nightly, becomes a defining feature of urban family life, ensuring that duty continues seamlessly from public streets into private rooms. And as lamps dim and voices fade, belief quietly enters the household, offering meaning and protection, but also introducing new fears that extend beyond human authority.
As families settle into the quiet of evening, belief does not arrive suddenly or dramatically, because in an ancient Chinese city, faith is already present long before lamps are lit, woven into walls, routines, and habits, so familiar that most people no longer separate it from daily life. Belief exists not as abstract philosophy, but as a practical companion to survival, offering comfort where certainty is scarce, an explanation where control ends. Temples rise throughout the city, sometimes grand and sometimes modest, their presence integrated into neighborhoods rather than set apart, allowing belief to remain close and accessible. The sound of bells or the faint drift of incense marks time just as reliably as market hours or curfews, reminding residents that unseen forces share the city with them, watching quietly and responding unpredictably. Inside homes, small household altars occupy corners or shelves, receiving daily offerings that are simple and repetitive, reinforcing continuity rather than spectacle. These rituals are not performed for display, but for reassurance, a way to maintain balance in a world shaped by forces beyond human reach. A pinch of incense, a quiet bow, a moment of stillness, small gestures meant to keep misfortune distant. The comforting side of belief lies in its familiarity, as ritual creates structure and meaning, helping people endure hardship without constant fear. In crowded cities where illness, fire, and scarcity threaten stability, belief provides a sense of order that cannot be enforced by law alone, offering emotional shelter where physical shelter remains limited. Yet alongside comfort lives anxiety, because belief also demands correctness, precision, and respect, and mistakes carry consequences that feel deeply personal. Forgetting an offering, misplacing a charm, neglecting a ritual. None bring immediate punishment, but uncertainty grows quietly, filling the space where reassurance once lived. Spirits, ancestors, and unseen forces populate the mental landscape of the city, shaping decisions about travel, work, marriage, and health. Night, in particular, amplifies these fears, as darkness reduces visibility and imagination fills the gaps, making every unfamiliar sound feel significant. Even adults, grounded in routine, remain aware that not all dangers are human. The darker aspect of belief appears in its ability to justify misfortune, as illness or loss is often interpreted as imbalance rather than chance. This interpretation provides explanation, but also limits response, encouraging acceptance rather than resistance, and reinforcing the idea that endurance is preferable to change. In this way, belief supports stability even when it deepens suffering. Religious specialists, monks, and ritual practitioners hold quiet influence, offering guidance and reassurance, while also reinforcing the importance of adherence. Their presence comforts many, yet reminds others of their dependence on knowledge they do not possess, maintaining subtle hierarchies within belief itself. Humor exists here as well,
quietly acknowledged rather than spoken, as people recognize the effort required to keep gods, spirits, ancestors, and officials all equally satisfied, a task that sometimes feels endless. Yet this awareness does not weaken belief, it humanizes it, allowing people to continue with patience rather than frustration. Belief also shapes space, influencing how homes are arranged, how doors face, and how objects are placed, embedding spiritual considerations into physical design. These choices feel natural, not restrictive, because they are learned early and repeated often, becoming part of the city's unspoken grammar. As incense smoke curls upward and lamps cast soft shadows, belief fills the gaps left by law and family obligation, offering both reassurance and restraint. It comforts without freeing, explains without resolving, sustains without promising relief. This balance allows the city to persist not through joy but through meaning. As the night deepens, belief does not fade with light, but grows quieter and more personal, accompanying residents into sleep, where dreams reflect hopes, fears, and unanswered questions shaped by ritual and routine. In this stillness, belief becomes both shield and burden, present even when eyes close. And as the city rests under watchful spirits and silent expectations, another vulnerability waits just beneath the surface, because belief cannot protect bodies from illness, dirt, and the fragile limits of human health.
When belief grows quieter and lamps dim across the city, the human body remains exposed because no ritual, wall, or law can fully protect it from sickness, exhaustion, and decay. Inside an ancient Chinese city, health is not a stable condition, but a fragile balance, maintained day by day under difficult circumstances. Crowded living spaces place bodies close together, allowing warmth, sound, and breath to travel freely, but also allowing illness to move just as easily. In narrow alleys, ventilation is poor, and sunlight struggles to reach the ground. In summer, heat presses into courtyards and rooms, trapping moisture and smell. In winter, cold drafts slip through wooden frames, weakening bodies already worn by labor. Water must be carried from wells or canals, and while it sustains life, it also carries risk, as contamination is difficult to detect and rarely understood. Cleanliness exists more as effort than result, shaped by access rather than intention. For many families, hygiene depends on weather, time, and physical strength rather than choice. Cooking fires fill homes with smoke, a constant presence that irritates lungs and eyes, accepted as unavoidable. Over time, coughing becomes common, breathing grows shallow, discomfort settles into routine. Illness is rarely named unless it prevents work entirely. Pain is tolerated quietly, because rest is a luxury few can afford. Herbal remedies and traditional treatments exist and are widely used, offering comfort and occasional relief. Their effectiveness varies, and serious illness often progresses beyond what households can manage. Without understanding of infection or disease transmission, families rely on experience, belief, and hope, treating symptoms rather than causes. Outcomes are accepted as part of life's rhythm. The darker reality lies in how quickly small problems become serious. Minor wounds from labor can fester, fevers spread unchecked, weakness limits the ability to earn food. In a city where survival depends on daily contribution, sickness threatens not just the individual, but the household's stability. Illness becomes a shared anxiety. Children are especially vulnerable, their bodies less resilient to disease. Infant mortality remains high,
shaping family life with quiet grief that rarely disrupts routine publicly. Loss is acknowledged, ritualized, absorbed. Endurance is reinforced rather than protest. Waste disposal remains basic, with refuse accumulating in alleys and near dwellings. Insects gather, animals follow. The smell of decay blends into the city's sensory background, familiar enough to ignore, persistent enough to remind residents of vulnerability. Health is not something expected to last indefinitely. It is something to manage until it fails. During outbreaks, fear spreads faster than knowledge. Illness appears without warning, disappears without explanation. Belief in imbalance or fate fills the gaps. Quarantine measures, when they exist, are limited and inconsistent. Families care for the sick at home, increasing exposure while reinforcing bonds of beauty. Despite these conditions, communities develop informal systems of care. Remedies are shared, advice is offered, assistance appears when possible. These acts soften hardship but do not remove it. Humor, when it appears, is subtle and resigned, acknowledging sickness without dwelling on despair. Complaining changes little. Acceptance allows life to continue. Health becomes another condition to navigate, like weather or law. As night falls, bodies seek rest on mats or low platforms. Muscles ache, breath grows heavy. Sleep offers recovery, but not immunity. Dreams are shallow, interrupted by coughs, insects, or heat. Even rest is fragile within crowded walls. This constant negotiation with illness shapes behavior, encouraging caution, routine, and restraint. Stability is favored over comfort. Health is valued but rarely expected to endure. Survival becomes the measure of success rather than well-being. And as the city continues to breathe through narrow streets and shared spaces, another threat lingers, unpredictable and swift. Fire, accident, sudden ruin. Ever-present companions within wooden walls, waiting quietly for the moment when balance breaks.
But when sickness weakens bodies slowly and quietly, fire threatens everything at once. Because in an ancient Chinese city, disaster does not always arrive gradually. Among all dangers that haunt life behind the walls, fire is the one that ignores routine, hierarchy, and preparation, turning order into chaos within moments. Most cities are built largely of wood, with closely packed homes, workshops, and market stalls sharing walls, roofs, and air. Flames travel faster than people can react. Kitchens, oil lamps, furnaces, and incense burners remain necessary parts of daily life, yet each carries risk, transforming ordinary actions into potential catastrophe. Fire is not rare, it is expected, feared, and quietly accepted as part of urban existence. During the day, smoke blends into the city's background, masking early signs of danger. At night, darkness amplifies fear, as a single spark can spread unseen until it is too late. Fire watches and patrols exist, scanning rooftops and alleys, but their reach is limited, and response depends on human speed rather than certainty. When alarms sound, panic often arrives before coordination. The lighter side of this shared vulnerability appears in collective response, as neighbors rush to help, forming bucket lines, tearing down walls, or carrying belongings into streets. Instinct replaces instruction. Urgency replaces order. For a brief moment, hierarchy blurs, and cooperation becomes survival rather than virtue. Yet the darker truth is how easily everything can be lost. Once fire takes hold, it shows little mercy, consuming homes, tools, food stores, and records without discrimination. For families living near subsistence, the loss of a house is not just displacement,
It is the erasure of stability, labor, and memory built over years. Accidents beyond fire also threaten daily life. Crowded streets, heavy loads, and manual labor expose bodies to sudden injury. Porters slip, carts overturn, scaffolding collapses. Wounds that seem manageable can turn fatal without proper care. These incidents rarely become stories. They are absorbed quietly into routine, reinforcing caution rather than outrage. The unpredictability of ruin shapes behavior subtly, encouraging preparedness without expectation of safety. Families keep essential items ready, aware that evacuation may come without warning. Others accept loss as inevitable, focusing on endurance rather than prevention. This mindset reduces panic, but also limits resistance, reinforcing acceptance over change. Night intensifies these fears. Reduced visibility increases vulnerability, and the city's silence becomes fragile, easily shattered by shouts or bells signaling danger. Lantern light flickers against walls, shadows stretch unpredictably. Sleep remains shallow because rest always carries the possibility of interruption. The psychological weight of constant risk fosters resilience, but also fatigue. Residents learn to live with the understanding that stability is temporary. Comfort is enjoyed cautiously. Attachment remains measured. Investment without expectation eases loss. This restraint mirrors the emotional discipline practiced elsewhere in city life. Humor appears quietly here too, in resigned remarks about rebuilding again, or the patience required to start over. Not because loss is trivial, but because despair offers no shelter. After disaster passes, rebuilding begins quickly, driven by necessity rather than optimism. Structures rise again, sometimes improved, often unchanged, as repetition feels safer than experimentation. The city absorbs ruin as part of its rhythm, reinforcing continuity through reconstruction rather than reflection. Fire and accident remind residents that order depends not only on law and belief, but on fortune. This awareness tempers ambition and encourages conformity, because standing out carries risk in a world already unstable. As night settles once more, the city quiets under watchful eyes, aware that danger never fully sleeps. Survival depends on attention as much as obedience. And as darkness deepens, another layer of vulnerability emerges, quieter but persistent, because the night itself carries fear, uncertainty, and exposure that no wall can fully contain. When night finally settles over the ancient Chinese city, it does not arrive as rest, but as a different state of tension, quieter on the surface, yet heavier underneath, because darkness does not erase the city's problems, it simply changes the way they are felt. After sunset, the gates close, sealing everyone inside, and with that single act, the city becomes a contained world, cut off from fields, roads, and escape, where every sound carries farther and every movement feels observed. Lanterns glow softly along main streets, while narrow alleys fall into shadow, creating uneven pockets of light and darkness that shape how people move, speak, and even breathe. Families retreat indoors early, not because sleep comes easily, but because night increases risk, and being visible after curfew invites punishment, suspicion, or danger. Guards patrol familiar routes, their presence reassuring to some and unsettling to others, as authority becomes more noticeable when the city grows quiet. Inside homes, the lighter side of night appears briefly, as meals are shared, tools are set aside, and families gather close, using warmth and proximity as comfort against uncertainty. Oil lamps cast low light across courtyards, shadows flickering against wooden walls, while conversation softens, reflecting fatigue rather than relaxation. Yet darkness brings its own discomforts, As heat trapped by stone and wood lingers, insects emerge in numbers, and air thickens in enclosed spaces, making rest difficult. Sleep surfaces are simple, often mats or low platforms, offering little separation from the ground, while noise travels easily through thin walls, preventing true isolation. The city never fully sleeps because animals move through streets, dogs bark at unseen threats, and distant sounds echo unpredictably, reminding residents that safety is relative, not guaranteed. Even small noises feel amplified, turning routine disturbances into moments of alertness. Fear at night is not dramatic, but persistent, shaped by stories of theft, spirits, fire, and illness, all more potent in darkness. Women and children remain especially vulnerable, and families rely on proximity rather than locks for security, trusting presence over barriers. Health concerns grow heavier after dark as illness worsens when care is limited and travel restricted, forcing families to manage sickness alone until morning. Feverish breathing, coughing, and quiet prayer become part of the nighttime soundscape, reinforcing the fragility of life inside crowded walls. Humor still finds a way in muted forms as people complain softly about heat, mosquitoes, or restless neighbors, sharing knowing remarks that acknowledge discomfort without inviting complaint. These small moments of levity serve as release, reminding residents that endurance is easier when shared. Night also intensifies belief as rituals become more frequent and careful. Incense burns longer, and whispered prayers seek protection against unseen forces. Spiritual fear blends with practical caution, reinforcing behaviors learned through repetition rather than instruction. Sleep itself becomes shallow and fragmented, shaped by vigilance rather than rest, because the body remains alert to sound, heat, and movement. Dreams mingle with waking awareness, blurring boundaries between rest and watchfulness, leaving mornings less restorative than necessary. Despite this, dawn always arrives, and night's discomfort is tolerated because it is temporary, part of a cycle accepted rather than challenged. The city survives not by offering comfort, but by maintaining rhythm, where endurance matters more than ease. As lamps dim and streets grow still, the city breathes quietly, holding together through habit and shared expectation, even when rest remains elusive. And as the final lanterns fade, attention turns inward, because beyond the noise, labor, and fear lies a deeper question about why life inside these walls continues as it does.
By the time morning returns to the ancient Chinese city, nothing truly changes, and yet everything continues, because this world was never designed for transformation, but for endurance, where life moves forward not through choice, but through repetition that feels so natural it rarely invites question. Inside these walls, people did not wake each day asking what they wanted to become, but what was expected of them, because identity here was shaped long before birth, quietly assigned through family, status, gender, and duty, leaving little space for deviation and even less for escape. The city did not demand happiness, ambition, or fulfillment. It demanded participation. Order was the foundation upon which survival rested, not because it was kind, but because it was predictable, and predictability reduced chaos in a place where too many lives existed too close together. Streets were narrow, homes were crowded, food was never guaranteed, danger lingered in silence rather than spectacle. So stability mattered more than freedom ever could. From childhood, people learned where they belonged, not through instruction, but through observation, watching elders repeat the same actions day after day, year after year, until routine itself became truth. Work was inherited, roles were reinforced, deviation carried quiet consequences that did not need to be announced to be understood. The darker side of this order lived beneath its calm surface, because control followed people everywhere, in curfews, inspections, collective responsibility, and the unspoken awareness that behavior was always visible, even when no one appeared to be watching. Privacy existed only in fragments. Silence was often safer than honesty. Yet this same structure protected the city from collapse, because without it, crowded streets would dissolve into disorder, markets would fail, and families would struggle alone rather than together. The system worked not because it was just, but because it minimized uncertainty in a world where uncertainty could be deadly. Faith helped soften this reality, offering meaning where choice was limited, turning obedience into virtue and endurance into moral strength. Rituals provided reassurance that suffering had purpose, that hardship followed cosmic balance rather than arbitrary cruelty, allowing people to accept their place without constant resistance. Humor survived quietly within these limits, appearing in small complaints, shared glances, and subtle remarks about heat, noise, or long days, because even in rigid systems, people find ways to acknowledge discomfort without challenging the structure that holds everything together. Generations passed without expecting change because continuity itself became success, and a good life was measured not by personal achievement, but by fulfilling obligations without disrupting the fragile balance around them. Children grew into adults who repeated the same paths, slept in the same rooms, and carried the same responsibilities, not out of ignorance, but because this repetition ensured survival. The city endured because most people accepted that freedom was not the goal, stability was, and within that acceptance, life found its rhythm. Roads remained intact, markets reopened, families persisted. The walls continued to hold, not as symbols of imprisonment, but as boundaries that made the city possible. As night returns once more, lanterns glow softly, voices lower, and the city settles back into itself, unchanged yet alive, held together by habit, duty, and quiet resilience. There is no dramatic ending here, no final triumph, no collapse, only continuation, the steady breathing of a place built to last rather than inspire. And perhaps that is why these cities survived for centuries, not because they promised happiness, but because they understood human limits, shaping lives that could endure pressure without breaking, even when comfort was rare and choice was narrow. Now, as the city fades into darkness again and the sounds soften into distance, you can let this world slowly drift away, carrying only its calm rhythm with you, leaving behind the weight of walls, rules, and expectations. The gates are closed, the lanterns dim, the streets grow quiet. And here, at the end of our gentle journey, you may rest. Good night.